Greetings, everyone, and thanks for coming out on this wonderful day, a wonderful Saturday with a great weather out there that's perfect for ducks, but not really for anyone else. But anyway, welcome to the Slovak American Society of Washington, D.C.'s program today, which is called A Magnet for Talent, How Slovakia Chose to Tackle Its Brain Drain Problem. And our guest today is Miss Iva Kleinová. Did I say it right? Okay. And she is the Director of Strategy, currently on sabbatical, at VAIA, the Slovak Research and Innovation Authority. She led the team that wrote and is implementing the most recent version of the National Strategy for Research and Innovation, and also wrote a white paper called Magnet for Talent that tackles Slovakia's brain drain problem. Ms. Kleinová has international experience in the private, nonprofit, and academic sectors, and she has degrees from Princeton and Columbia. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Georgine Chastain. I'm the president of Slovak American Society of Washington, D.C. And our program director, Helen Fedor, is going to interview Iva today. So I'm going to turn it over to Helen, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Hello and welcome. I'm glad everybody made it out today. A little doubtful. We're very happy to have Iva Kleinová here. She'll tell us how she comes to be here. Honestly, when I first contacted her to see if she would be willing to give a talk on the subject of the Slovak brain drain, I heard her interviewed on a Slovak language podcast out of Bratislava called Dobré ráno. I thought, okay, well, we'll set this up. It'll be a nice Saturday afternoon Zoom talk. And she said, oh, you know, I'm going to be in the U.S. Can we do this in person? I said, oh, are you kidding me? Sure. So I'll let her tell you in her own words how she came to be here and a little bit about herself. So why don't you start off with your background and how you came to be here.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much for reaching out and for having me and for all of you to come in this rainy weather. I'm very honored. So yeah, I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. actually. I did my studies here and also some time outside of studies with my husband. So maybe a total of about 7 years in different parts of the United States. And so it's kind of wonderful to be back. I'm on a sabbatical here. It just kind of happened to me because my husband is teaching architecture at UVA, University of Virginia. So we're in Charlottesville, and it's been quite wonderful. So I'm taking a break from work, but it's great to be able to talk a little bit about what we did last year, and to be able to share it. I mean, Georgine introduced me, so I work for the Research and Innovation Authority, VAIA, which is kind of like a new unit. It was founded just 2 years ago at the Prime Minister's office, so Úrad vlády, under Prime Minister Heger. So we were tasked to do the reform of the research and innovation. Part of it was writing a strategy and a plan of like how to do it. And that's also how we came to kind of be thinking about talent a lot, because one chapter of the national strategy is also dealing with, well, how do we get more highly qualified, highly educated people to want to be here and not, wanting to leave. So that's where we started, and then I don't know how much you were following the topsy-turvy Slovak politics, but we've had a lot of prime ministers in the last few years. I think the president recently said that she had 5 prime ministers during her 5-year tenure. So the last prime minister before this one was the caretaker of government, Mr. Odor. And so this talent question, brain drain question, was one of his don't want to say hot topics, but in a good way. He considered and considers this still one of the kind of really dramatic or important questions for Slovakia, because if we have a lot of highly talented people leaving the country and then not enough coming back, and also we're not open enough to highly talented talent from abroad, from other countries, then it has all kinds of repercussions, not just for innovation and for research and so on, but just for the economy. And we can talk about it a little bit more in detail. But yeah.
How did you come to this topic in the first place?
To the talent topic? Or
Yes. Oh, well, the brain drain talent.
Yeah, so through kind of thinking about the innovation strategy, because we did a very participatory process designing the strategy. We talked to hundreds of people, companies, researchers. We did kind of in-depth interviews. We did a very involved process, and we were listening to what the problems were and like where do we need to fix things. One of the big problems that coming up all the time, whether from companies, from startups, from big companies, from everyone really, was we don't have enough high quality people who can do this. And if we really want to speed up and we want to change the economic model of Slovakia from more of a manufacturing system to a more value-added economy, then that's where we need to really speed up to be attractive for talent, because it's one of the things we also say here, but it's been shown by research also that talent attracts talent. So the more talented people you have, the more want to come again. And so how do you, and the opposite is true also. Like the more people are leaving, the more others want to leave, because it's like it's these feedback cycles, let's say. So how do we do the virtuous cycle and not the vicious cycle?
Okay, so when you're not on sabbatical, what is it that you do as head of strategy at VAIA?
Yeah, so for the first year, we just started 2 years ago, and we built this team from 2 people to 40 in those 2 years. So it's been kind of a scale-up situation, let's say, or a startup scale-up within the public service, which was an interesting experience, with a combination of people who are really experienced in the public service and people who are coming from very different other fields. So also from startups or from big companies or the nonprofit sector. So it's been really kind of joyous, I think, to do it. But for the first year mostly, we were doing this big participatory process. We wrote the strategy. We had to have it pass through all the, public comments and so on, as we do. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with how governments work, but that's the right way to do it anyway. Once it was passed, which was in March last year, so a year ago now, we started implementing it. So now I was responsible not for the whole implementation, but for part of it. So we kind of rearranged the team a little bit, and so we're doing specific things for the innovation part. So for startups, for companies to want to invest in research and innovation, and encourage them to do that. We have the talent unit, which we set up with some specific people who then raised their hands to do this paper when the Prime Minister asked who was going to do it. So we said we would. And then we have obviously people who are doing like more the research side, and how do we finance research, how do we finance infrastructure, research infrastructure, and then different parts of it. And then we also have a team that is dealing with, so all of this is more part of the reform. But we also we're taking care of about 600 million euros of funding for different, for research. which is outside of the Ministry of Ministry of Education or Ministry of Economy, which is part of something called the Recovery and Resilience Plan. I don't know if I should go too much into it, but it's basically the European Union's response to COVID. So post-COVID, there was like a big investment across the EU. Slovakia got several billion euros with the funding for different things, but basically the way the plan works is that you have to do reforms, and when you do reforms, you can do investments. So you get the money kind of over time, and you have to really show that you're doing this. So for us, the reform was the strategy and really starting to change things structurally for research and innovation.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
your paper, the Magnet for Talent?
Yeah.
What prompted you to write this?
Right. Well, I mean, we know that the numbers are not good in terms of brain drain for Slovakia and also brain gain. So, like, that's the back and forth, obviously. And I'm going to help myself here. I just wrote some numbers because it's been half a year since we wrote this. So, but basically, we have about 264,000 citizens living abroad. So people who were actually born in Slovakia left during their lifetime. So, like, you know, typically since we joined the EU, since like, you know, early 2000s, left, and some of them came back, but roughly, in general, roughly about half are coming back. So a lot of people are actually staying long-term abroad. About a third of them are university educated. We also know that about 30,000 students are studying abroad, which is on its own not a problem for us. So we are happy if students go and have that experience. It's wonderful for them. But the proportion is way too big. So we have the average in the EU or OECD, but basically the same thing, is about, in most countries, about 4% of students go study abroad. For us, it's 22. So we're like the second highest country where students go abroad. The first country is Luxembourg, but Luxembourg is so tiny, you know, it's like very different reasons, I would say. They actually pay my brother-in-law lives in Luxembourg, works for the court there, European court, and the Luxembourg actually pays for students to study abroad. They give them like a couple thousand euros as a stipend. But we have, out of these 22%, the biggest part are going to the Czech Republic. So really, like, those who go to the US, to the UK, now less because it's more expensive after Brexit, or to Holland, which is very popular. You know, that's not going to be too much higher than 4%. Maybe it's like 7%. So it's, you know, it's okay-ish. But we have a huge population going to the Czech Republic, which has like slightly better universities. And it's also, the language barrier is very low, and, you know, it's just easy to come back. And if you go to a place like Brno, which is just an hour away, hour and 20 minutes away from Bratislava, it feels almost like, you know, staying at home. But the parents are not there, so it's actually right. So that's, and it's hard to get people back from the Czech Republic because it's just so similar culturally and so on. We are not very open to foreigners, even the really highly educated ones. So about, you know, 280,000 foreigners live in Slovakia. About 23% are university educated of them. So, you know, we would like to increase that to make sure that, you know, we are much more open and it's easier for them to get here. And then obviously we don't know exactly how many, but we have about 1 million Slovaks from the third, fourth, you know, second, third, fourth generation, like maybe many of you, who mostly live in countries outside of the EU. So, you know, here in the US, in in Australia and in other countries who left kind of much earlier, in the earlier waves of immigration. So, how do we engage those people more and better as well, so that it makes sense for Slovakia? Maybe not to return or to, come to Slovakia, although you are coming for a short time. But maybe, encourage some of those returns also to kind of be more meaningful and to have a platform for them. And maybe just you were asking also like why we did that. So I spoke about like why it's a problem, but it's a problem for our country for different reasons. So we have colleagues who are really good with numbers, and they did this like simulation model. So just on the kind of value-added financial point of view, every person who leaves Slovakia at the end of university or the beginning of their career, and they stay for the duration of their career abroad, Slovakia is losing about 2.8 million euros in added value for each of them, each person over their lifetime of productive life. So it's like when you multiply that by the tens of thousands of people or 100,000 of people, it's a lot of people. Plus, it's a little bit more complicated to calculate that for people who are incoming, but it's a similar number too. So if you have someone who comes to Slovakia at the beginning of their career and they stay and they kind of, add value, live there, pay taxes and so on, they're also adding about that amount. And it changes over time. It's going to be, if we calculate that next year, it's going to be even higher. So it's, it grows. So that's number one. It's like financially, we're losing out. The second thing is, it's a big problem, as I said before, for our competitiveness. So our companies are just crying for talent. I mean, they're really kind of, they for a lot of, there was actually that, recently I saw some kind of report on like how well different cities compare to each other. And Bratislava was one of the cities that was compared. And together with Prague, Bratislava and Prague, I think were one of the cities where it was kind of easiest to find a job because there were so many jobs available. And so that's what we hear from companies as well, that it's just really difficult, especially for some very specific, advanced, more complicated jobs to find the right talent. And before the war in Ukraine, some of them were actually gave up on bringing Ukrainians to Slovakia because it was just complicated to bring someone from outside the EU, and they started, having offices in Kiev. Now it's more complicated because of the war, but it was just easier to have like a satellite office in Ukraine because there were so many talented people who could, who could really benefit their company. So companies have been asking for it. Fiscally, it's becoming complicated because European Union has projections that Slovakia, because of relatively low birth rates and relatively low immigration rates, is going to, by 2030, lose about, 20,000 people? Yeah, 120,000 fewer people in productive age are going to be living in the country. So that's people who are not going to pay taxes, paying for Social Security, paying for our medical insurance system, where we help each other pay for the bills, and just generally less money for the budget. So so for those reasons also, it's it's becoming, we have to figure out a way to we're not going to live as well and be able to pay for everything we want if we don't start kind of working on how we fix that gap. And then the last thing, and I'm going to ask, sorry I keep talking, but
No. We're here to listen to you talk.
But the last part is kind of, I don't know if it's a stretch. I don't think it's a stretch, but we don't have like specific data on this, but we do think there's a social element to it as well. We know that a lot of families have been broken because of this, especially the brain drain the recent brain drain. So you have sometimes, you know, part of, you know, just a husband going, or typically a husband going abroad, and the wife and the kids stay. So you have these families who are living, you know, long distance. Or you will have, you know, students who are going abroad, they stay there, and they stay away from their parents. And I know in the US, you're much more used to kind of staying farther away from the kids and people. There's a lot more social mobility, or not social mobility, geographic mobility. But it is true that, you know, there is this factor of, you know, people kind of being pretty far away from each other, families not being together, and we know that, you know, the effects of loneliness, for example, among some people, have effects on health. So loneliness has effects on higher, or is associated with higher heart attacks, depression, stress, even higher rates of Alzheimer's disease, for example. So those are kind of social costs that, or personal costs as well, that you have. And also with lower social cohesion. So people who are lonely are less friendly to others, more likely to, less patient with reforms, for example, more likely to kind of join, to use harsher words in debates and so on. So all those things that are kind of, you know, that we don't want in the society, kind of there might be also a link. So it's not kind of the main thing, and it's maybe sometimes like you can say, well, it's a little bit of a stretch, they still see each other, we still have, you know, FaceTime or so on, but there is this aspect as well.
Has that shown up among, say, the children in these families? Where the parents, one living abroad, one living in the country, and then the kids are, so they're just almost in a single parent household?
Yeah, so it's mostly, less for the highly educated group, like those typically go together. But there are also a lot of people in kind of the lower, less educated people who go abroad, and they typically leave. Typically, it's for like manufacturing work or so on. They go to Germany, and they go to other countries. Used to go to the UK quite a bit. Excuse me. Or for the women, there's a specific group of women who go and work in Austria as kind of home care workers. So, or they take care of seniors, for example, or so on. So, so you have these. Yes, you have these families who are actually we're making single-parent households. They might not have financial problems because, you know, these people will bring money from abroad, probably higher wages than they would make in Slovakia. But I guess all of us agree that if you can choose, it's better to have two parents than one. Also the parents. I was a single parent for months while my husband was here for for the first semester last year, and it was fine. But would I prefer to have him there? Yes. I mean, because it's just more complicated.
Well,
for
and
a
you knew
single
that it was
person
just
to do
temporary.
everything, and I knew it was just temporary.
So you've told us the size of the Slovak brain drain and the impact. What about the causes of the brain drain? I imagine that there are several of them, some much more important than others, but still some of them doing a slight push, or it's just enough, that, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back.
Right. So it differs for the different groups, right? So when we're talking about the young talent, who's the high school seniors who are leaving to study abroad. That's one group. For them, the reason is really the real or perceived view that the schools in Slovakia, universities in Slovakia are not very good. And that's, I think in general, like the right assessment, so they're not, wonderful, I would say. There are programs that are wonderful, but because they have this, so that's where the perception comes in, that they just have this feeling that all of them are bad. So I think the universities just have to do a better job really communicating based on data, based on evidence, where not necessarily we're all wonderful, because no one's going to believe that, but the programs that are good, and we have that data now, because we've done also as part of the resilience and recovery and resilience plan. The colleagues at the Ministry of Education have done this external assessment of all the programs, all the university programs, based on which they're going to get the money, and the public universities. And this was done by foreigners, essentially, like people from abroad in their fields, looking at how they would compare those programs, where they their average or their European quality or global quality, and some of them are quite good. So so I think the university really have to kind of start communicating that better, and also just creating better, a generally better student experience. It depends. It varies quite a bit, but in general, I think they have a long way to go still to, especially if you compare it to some of the wonderful universities you have here. You have graduates who are leaving, so they study in Slovakia and they leave. Quite a few, actually. A lot of them, maybe half of them are thinking about leaving, not all of them actually leave. One of the problematic groups that we have here are doctors, and just generally medical workers. And part of it is that there's a lack of medical workers everywhere. So especially, in Europe, I'm not sure here, but in Europe, every country has a scarcity of medical workers, and so obviously they're actively recruiting them and trying to get them out of Slovakia, and they're again specifically for medicine and for nurses and so on. It's more of a question of how do you create really good working conditions. It's not so much about the salaries, I think. Yeah, like if you go to Norway, probably you're going to get paid a lot more, but it's more about the environment in the hospitals, and how do you make sure that people like to work there, because
Don't get burnt out.
They don't get burned out, but it's also like that they learn, and they have a place to grow, and people are treating them well, and so on. So how does that happen? And then there's a question of brain gain. So how do you encourage people to come back, and how do you create these opportunities also for foreigners to either come or to stay? So for foreigners, the problem is most foreigners, based on surveys, most foreigners who came to Slovakia really came by accident. So there's not like a brand for talent acquisition. That Slovakia, we said in the paper, that Slovakia is not on the map, the talent map of in the world. So we're not trying to someone in maybe in Ukraine they would know because we're right next to it, right? But someone in other countries, like some people in other countries in Asia or in Africa or so on, it's not like the first thing that comes to their mind is like, oh, I'm going to go to Slovakia. But they could, and we just haven't really done our homework to even try to make a case for this. So I think that's one of the reasons why talent is not coming also. Yeah, but it depends on, it's very different for each of those groups.
Let's see, we've got 4 parts or 4 policy interventions. in your paper. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I started talking about them a little bit already, but basically the goal, and we'll see how it goes with the new government. I mean, it hasn't been a priority so far, but we'll, the four areas are basically, the first one is to reduce rain drain, so fewer people leaving the country. Again, we don't mind if people go study abroad or so on, but we don't want the 22%. We want closer to the 4. So how do we reduce it at least to a half of what we have right now? So like at least to 10%. And the main things that we have to do, and this is probably the hardest part of the 4, is to help universities increase the added value of the university education by better promotion, but actually like better services to the students, like better care of students, and including the physical environment and so on. Some schools have already invested quite a bit to the nice dorms and everything. Other schools, especially like the best ones that are in Bratislava, haven't had access to a lot of the financing for renovations. So it's even that, you know, like just having a nicer environment, I would say, but like a more pro-client attitude. Just generally make, you know, better reforms of the universities, especially towards better financing, better grant systems, and so on. So that's the part that we're doing on the research and innovation side. So how do we bring kind of higher talent, better researchers, so that they, you know, who are also better teachers, who can then gradually just make the actual, you know, learning higher quality and so on. And then just help the universities be governed better, because we've had a reform of the university system also as part of the resilience plan. It didn't go far enough, we think. Universities really revolted. They didn't want it. But the government, I think, chickened out a little bit. So they were worried that the universities were pushing too much and so on, and they wanted to have it passed. And I think the universities we just have to continue pushing them to be more accountable for the money that they're getting from the public sources. So they think their goal is to really say, what they're saying is that, oh, we're independent, and, you know, if you put someone on our board, then we're going to, you know, we're not going to have the academic independence. But it's not about academic independence, it's about financial accountability to some results. So, and I think that's just done everywhere, and everyone does that. So we just have to kind of try again. So it's mostly about the universities, because that's where most people are. The second part, the second intervention is how do we increase the number of people who are coming back? So I said that about half of them are coming back right now. How can we change that to a little bit more, like a couple percentage points more? One way is to really increase the links with Slovakia. So how do we make sure that people have professional relationships with companies in Slovakia, with institutions in Slovakia? How do we kind of maybe finance some of the networking that happens, like, you know, here is happening, but also there are some kind of networks in New York of the kind of newer additions to the Slovak diaspora, like Slovak Pro, or there's a group called Brainboard in Silicon Valley of Slovaks who, you know, started companies there, and, you know, or work for the big tech companies who want to actually very actively offer to help and to advise, for example, companies in Slovakia and so on. So how can we make sure that those connections are very strong, and just start communicating the interest by the government in people coming back. I mean, typically these people are a little bit, how to say, they don't like when politicians come and they always just say, oh, come back, we need you. And they feel like it's like too pushy. But I think, you know, after, when we create a positive narrative that, you know, you don't have to come back, but really, we really would love to have you. Maybe you want to come back for a sabbatical. Maybe there are like shorter term ways or so on. And creating these avenues to explore what it is like to come back, I think, is a way to do it. People typically really come back. Some people come back for the family, but some people come back for, a lot of people are looking for specific opportunities. So something they could do, and I'm talking about the highly qualified talent now, when the opportunity is to do something that they couldn't do abroad, for example, either because at some point they hit, you know, like let's say a glass ceiling because they're foreigners, or they just, oftentimes what happens is that you get to do things earlier in your career in Slovakia when you have that foreign experience, for example, then you would be able to do abroad. So you have these opportunities that are real, and you just need to kind of communicate them well or create those opportunities for these people. And just to make it easier administratively. So it's relatively easy for someone who has a Slovak citizenship to come back. I mean, you just sign up for all the public, you know, health insurance and everything. But a lot of times these people are also coming back, for example, with a foreign spouse, and that starts becoming more complicated. So how do you make that process just a lot easier? One of the things we're doing this like one-stop shop setup where anyone coming from abroad, whether they're foreigners or Slovaks, can just come to one place, and there's someone who can help them with all the things, basically, in one place. So we'll see how that works, and it's supposed to start working in a year. So, okay, so that's number one. Number two is basically like, how do we make more people come back? The third one is foreigners. So what do we do to maximize the potential of people from abroad? Getting people on the immigration, or getting Slovakia on the immigration map, so it's like a branding issue, really. How do we communicate why Slovakia is a good country to live? And there are really like many things that make Bratislava and other parts of Slovakia really like lovely, high quality places for a high quality life. And we just don't even see it sometimes because I don't know, if Slovaks who have lived in the US for a long time are like that, probably not anymore, but Slovaks who live in Slovakia are extremely critical of Slovakia all the time, and we don't even see,
Slovak national.
okay, we don't even see all the good things that we have. And sometimes you have to go out to see like what it is that we have. So I think gradually just making like an authentic narrative about, you know, why Slovakia might be like a really lovely place to live. Probably not for someone who loves a metropolis or, you know, is enthralled with Paris or New York. But for a lot of other people, you know, we can still have Vienna, which is like an hour away. And that's over many years the best place to live in the world, I think, the best city. So it's just how do we do that? The second part there is just simplifying, you know, coming from abroad for foreigners. It's been really complicated for them. We've been waging these discussions/fights with the Ministry of Interior, who does the immigration policy, and the Ministry of Labor also does some immigration policy because they keep, you know, yeah, they have some concerns about, you know, people who shouldn't come or make it. So make sure that, you know, no terrorists come and so on, but then they make it really hard for everyone else who is very, very well qualified and just completely lovely to also come. And just make it a lot more complicated. Ukrainian talent, we've had, because of the war, we've had a lot of Ukrainians coming, obviously, as refugees, with their families, with kids, mostly, well, so students, first of all, so the number of international students actually has, from Ukraine, has risen dramatically in the last 2 years since the war has started. Also, a lot of students who are younger than 18 are coming so that they don't turn 18 in Ukraine and avoid the military service. We have, and then we have all the mostly mothers and children who came here, many of whom are very highly qualified. Actually, there's a higher percentage of very highly qualified people in this group than in the general population. But we haven't been able to use that potential as much as we could. So a lot of those people are working in jobs that are below their qualification levels, sometimes because they don't have the ability to, I don't know, there's not enough spaces in preschool, for example, so they need a very flexible job, so they take a job that's below their qualification, and that's unfortunate, and we shouldn't be, you know, we should make everything, we should do everything possible to use their qualifications the best way possible. And then the last part here is really just to start building a better narrative towards diversity and just welcoming foreigners, which I think it's more complicated now, but we still think it's an important part. So just kind of communicating that diversity can make us stronger, but we just have to kind of work with it and make sure that we all try to understand each other better. And the last part, the fourth part, is we understand that not everyone wants to come back. Sometimes there are objective reasons why people just want to stay, or there are people like you who, you know, were born here or grew up here, and you know, it's not, you have a strong bond with Slovakia, but you know, it's a different country also. There are also people who maybe studied in Slovakia and then they left, so they have a link, you know, like a positive relationship with the country, but it's not their country also, they went back home. So how do we keep in touch with those people, and how do we maybe make sure that they're engaged, and maybe they want to help in some ways, or they want to, whatever, to make it easy for them to be engaged. So voting from abroad, I think, is one topic that you know, we can vote for the parliamentary elections from abroad by post, but not for the other elections. So for the presidential elections, so I'm here for 2 elections actually, and I won't be able to vote in either of them, for the European elections and the presidential elections, which are actually the first. Which I'm sad about, because I would like to vote in both of them. Just to make it kind of easier also for people who maybe don't have the citizenship but have heritage, Slovak heritage, I know it's been kind of easier to get citizenship, but the administrative burdens are still quite substantial, and maybe some of you could tell me more about what they are. But just to make it easier, so for those who would like to get Slovak citizenship back for them or for their children, I mean, it's the passport to all of the EU, to all the good schools that are typically not in Slovakia, but in other countries. I think it's just, it is something that has value, and so let's just make it easier. I think that's part of it. or even just to make it easier, for example, to donate money from abroad to charitable causes or whatever, like all those kinds of things. So just to be engaged if people want to be. Yeah.
Now, are any of these interventions particularly difficult and will take a lot, or are there any low-hanging fruit that it would be easy to say, do it to get the ball rolling?
So the university ones are very difficult because we have very little, they have to do it themselves. we can incentivize them with money, but in terms of the quality and so on, they just need to want to do it themselves. And there are some programs that have been, especially not on the, maybe typically less on the university management level and more on the departmental or school level, that have really tried to kind of do their best and try to reach out to students and to do a really great atmosphere and just to create a great program. But I think they just have to really step up their game. And it's hard for the government to incentivize it. Because like you can give money, typically you have to do some, you have to attach the money to some kind of measure, but measuring quality is traditionally difficult, and it's very easy to find a way around it somehow. Yeah.
And the universities have their vested interests.
They have their vested interests, yeah. I mean, all the different parties have, but I think that's the most difficult part. Also, the one that is going to take the longest because it's a cultural change. So those always take long. There are some, I think, things that can be done relatively quickly. One we're already doing is one of the investments from the resilience plan. There's a grant scheme for connecting for organizations who want to connect Slovakia with Slovaks abroad. So for organizing events essentially. So I don't think it has been, like the recipients have been announced yet, but that should be, there's some amount of money, about 2 million I think, that are going to be put for a couple of years for those events. So I think that's quite nice to give them some resources for that. I think a low-hanging fruit are the international students in Slovakia, especially Ukrainians, because a lot of them study there and then they leave. And I mean, obviously that's going to happen, but we also want some of them to stay for some time, at least if they want to. And how do we create, I think is that's specific, well, two things. There's how do we integrate them more during their time here? So how do we make sure that they speak the language, at least to some extent, and it's easy to, and free maybe, to learn it? And how do we make sure that, at the point where they're deciding where to work, it's administratively easy, and that's like okay in terms of administrative, but also that the companies and all the organizations kind of know what to do to hire them, and it's just like a more seamless process at that stage where they leave university. And maybe they just stay for a couple years, that's fine. But they typically, especially the Ukrainians, study in Slovak, so they get free education. So we pay for them and then they leave. So how can we create a value proposition for them to stay? So I think that's one of the big wins. And I mean, generally a quick win would be just to start communicating that we do want more talent. I know the government now recently actually said something to that effect, I think mostly for lower qualified people. So I don't know, truck drivers or for the industry. But there was some kind of willingness to increase the quotas for foreigners coming in. But I think it's still far away from, me getting targeted LinkedIn posts from Canada telling me, come work in Canada, we want people like you. I think that's still, like, we need to edge in that direction more. But, and that wouldn't be so complicated to do. It would be a relatively, I think, quick win, just to formulate the value proposition, to formulate the branding and so on, and to start branding. But the more complicated part would be to make sure that those countries that we, mostly are targeting get more people at their embassies to actually do the visa work faster and so on. But there would have to be, we would have to choose to do it, or want to choose to do it. Yeah.
Now, from the other end, is there any sort of ground level, actions, but or movements or something? For example, I've heard that there's a group of it's university students called Princeton and Columbia. I want to stay here.
Yeah.
What kinds of things are they working on, and what kind of changes do they hope to bring? And is there something beyond university students?
Mm-hmm. So I think Centro Zostať was not necessarily a university student activity. It's an activity that started as a collaboration between a few companies and nonprofit organizations, and maybe students probably helped them. A lot of students joined in, but it wasn't a specifically student run activity. It was started very much before the parliamentary elections, because a lot of people, because the country is quite divided right now, like many countries, but it's they were worried that if the elections turn out a certain way, a lot of people would want to leave, and what they were trying to say was a lot of interesting and inspiring people were basically saying, I really like this country, I really like the quality of life I have here, I really want to stay here, and I'm going to stay here. And regardless of what the elections turn out to be. So, yeah, but there, so the brain drain question has actually, because of this paper, but also for different reasons, has been something that also media has been coming back to, and because every once in a while someone is just fed up with certain parts of the life in Slovakia. Well, I'm just going to leave. But it is also true, based on surveys, a lot of people will declare that they're thinking about leaving, but only the actual decision to leave is a lot fewer people actually take, because that's a big move to make. It's easier for people, I think, who have been abroad and who have some, network abroad, but to leave without a network, it's just a lot more complicated, and people typically choose not to.
I have a question, if
Yes.
I may.
Sure. My questions are at an end, so let's open it up to everybody.
And it has to do with dual citizenship and how difficult it is to get. Because I can tell you that my family, there are many people right now that would be interested actually in my generation in getting dual citizenship. They see that as very appealing. And not only that, the younger generation, like my nieces and nephews, who are actually applying for citizenship to Slovakia, how easy or difficult is it to sort of tweak those citizenship rules to make it more appealing, or to maybe attach citizenship with, well, you have to work here for
Right.
2 years, or if you work here, you have to work here for 3 years, you have to commit yourself, things like that. Because I think exposure has a lot to do with, and reputation has a lot to do with, based on what you said. And it seems like, it's a wonderful country, cost of living is probably fairly low. And it has great, it's like living in Colorado in many places, so, so I just wondered how difficult it is to change the,
Yeah, so so it used to be complicated to have a dual citizenship. Actually, some people would have to give up the other citizenship to have the
Right.
Slovak and so on. That's changed. It was mostly done because of some reasons with Hungary where, I don't want to go into the details. I don't know if I can explain the details, to give them justice, but basically, they didn't want people to have Slovaks in Slovakia to be taking Hungarian citizenship, so they made it mandatory to just have to choose one. They would have to give up the Slovak. I think that's done. So you can have a dual citizenship. That's no problem as far as I know. And I think 2 years ago they made it easier for Slovaks who can prove their heritage to, first of all, get a card of a Slovak living abroad, which has some benefits, I think, for, I hope I'm saying this right, but as far as I know, it's easier to get residency in Slovakia. So you don't come as a foreigner, but you come something in between a foreigner and a Slovak. So that's easier. And then it also makes it easier for these people to get citizenship. But I believe you have to live in Slovakia for a while. So you have to show that you were actually exposed to Slovakia. And I think it's a fair question, how long that period should be and how much you have to know the language and all of that. And one of the things we actually say in the paper is to look at those rules and to make sure they're similar to the countries that are around us, at least. The Czechs are doing it and so on. I think we're still a little bit stricter on that part. And then the last part is just based on the information that I have. A lot of people who are kind of looking into getting Slovak citizenship from the diaspora. The rules and the procedures are just kind of hard to understand. So just kind of making sure that those are clearly explained and maybe simplified. I think that's also maybe a quick thing that could be done even without changing the rules. So just explaining it better, because I know there's this woman who's looking into this very much, and she's been saying, well, there's like whole Facebook groups in the U.S. Where people are talking about how to get the Slovak citizenship, and they found it really complicated and just like difficult to understand what the procedures are. So maybe just explaining that better would be a good first start.
make it more appealing or
Yeah.
Because I know I have a nephew who is going through the process now, and his in was that his grandfather came here during a certain time period, and like I think somewhere around 1940. And so he had very little trouble getting dual citizenship for himself and his wife. But for me, my grandparents came here too early, so that would just mean that they would need to move up that date a little bit, and I would be able to get it, but I was just curious. And my other question was, how much does being a part of the EU either detract from or improve your ability to reverse the brain drain or attract people?
Well, within the EU, it's obviously very easy to travel and to work anywhere. So it's like you just change your residency essentially, and you can travel. So in that sense, obviously also in terms of studying, I mean, like that's one of the reasons why so many students are studying abroad, because you have these universities that give the same entrance exams, obviously, but also the same payment rules for everyone in the EU. So, you know, I mean, you can go to study at really great universities in the Netherlands, you know, for $8,000 a year or something, you know, so it's like, I mean, just to, so, you know, you can get this Slovak passport and then go to Holland, but it's, so it's just been, you know, it didn't help us in that sense, but obviously also it's wonderful in many ways. I mean, students and people who go abroad and, you know, live abroad, and then if they do come back, they bring a whole different perspective, you know, a whole network. You know, it's not a, you know, it's not necessarily just a one-sided bad thing for us, and as I said, you know, I think it could be one of the elements of the value proposition for the people who are not in the EU to be able to have access through Slovakia to all of the EU. So that's great. The other thing is that Slovakia actually has been able to attract some people from other parts of the EU, especially the southern states. So we have quite a few Greeks, Portuguese, Spanish, and Italians, where the opportunities for work haven't been very good, or even the salaries, for example, like how much you make, how much money you make in Portugal for young people has been lower for some professions than in Slovakia. So you have quite a few people from those parts of the EU coming in and working in some international companies mostly, and so on. So, and the way that immigration works is actually quite interesting. I was talking to the head of HR of Swiss Re, which is a Swiss company that has like 5,000 people and working in Bratislava or something. They do, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they insure insurance companies, so they're like the above, yeah. And they have all these interesting jobs for, you know, people who are PhDs in math and so on, because obviously they have to do a lot of, you know, products for everyone, for the whole world in this sector. But she said, you know, they have a lot of people from these countries working for them in Bratislava, and once in a while they even had like chartered, you know, that these people there would be so many of them that they would charter planes back to, it was easier to fly back to Greece together. And the reason why it was easier is that they were all from the same area. So you would have people coming in, and then they would tell their high school friends or university friends, and you would have these like communities all coming together to Slovakia. Or in terms of foreign students, and you know, this is where we can do, obviously, in some segments of the university education, we can do a good job. We have a lot of Norwegian students coming to study medicine in Slovakia because it's just a lot cheaper, and it's good quality for them, so they come to, not to Bratislava so much, a little bit, but mostly to Martin, which is in the middle, central Slovakia. And there's a whole like Norwegian, you know, enclave living there. Then they leave. They almost never stay. But you have these groups that are you know, migrating within the EU. I mean, Norway is not in the EU, but it's like an associated country, so it's easier for them to travel. But yeah, so yes, sorry.
To kind of follow up on that, I mean, clearly there are a lot of institutional factors in the decision. But you mentioned that, well, maybe the wages is not that big a factor, but I wonder if you could give me a little more perspective, because for certain jobs,
yeah,
like they would pay like an EU standard, I would tend to think,
Right.
pretty much equal, like accounting job or a financial job, management jobs, white collar jobs, you know, that. But for other industries and stuff, like take automobiles, you know, one of the reasons a country like Slovakia gets automobile factories is because, well, probably cost of living is lower and they can pay lower wages, just like we have maybe here in the South or something. So, you know, so the wages have to play some role, but I mean, I don't know if you can give a perspective on how that works by in various
So,
industries.
You're right, there are some companies that can be competitive, if not globally, then on a, maybe like a European level, at least Central European level. We have some companies that have you know, remote offices around the world, so they have the same pay rate across the world, so they are able to, you know, basically give the same wages in Slovakia as in other parts. Yeah, and then there are obviously some places where, or some sectors that pay less. I mean, I'm not going to talk about those that are completely underpaid, like teachers, where it's a big problem. But we're obviously that's a group that we you know, it would be wonderful to get some people to come back, especially from Slovakia. But it would have to be Slovaks and, you know, typically less foreigners to teach in the schools. But I think in general, I think you have to think about the overall kind of cost of living and so on. So Bratislava is not inexpensive, I would say, but a lot of other parts are relatively inexpensive compared to, you know, elsewhere. I think I mean, I see it now, for example. I mean, it's a different situation because I'm not working right now, and so we're like doing a one salary situation, but it's pretty expensive to live here, I think, especially like where we are now, you know, so I think with, you know, what we're making, for example, and I work for the public sector, my husband is an architect, you know, it's, you can have a really quite lovely life in Slovakia, and we would have to make a lot more money to have that same quality of life here. So, yeah. So.
Our organization, Slovak American Society of Washington, we have for many years raised funds to provide scholarships for Slovak students to attend a Slovak university. And so hopefully they are educated in Slovakia and then they stay there. Is there anything else that you can think of that a group like ours could do to help the brain drain?
I think, you know, networking with some of the other organizations and, you know, being kind of spreading the news about how you know, some of the organizations are kind of really actively trying to figure out how to be in touch, how to help, they are building a network of organizations like the NGOs, for example, and so on in Slovakia, who might need some help, you know, advice on some things, or, you know, kind of like expert volunteering for someone here. So those kinds of things, I think, you know, learning from each other and working together, I think would be nice. I mean, I don't know. I would, when you have a chance to provide views on the citizenship questions and so on for the embassy, I think it's always good to get that feedback and to kind of gently push them to bring that up, you know, and to start that. I mean, we would like to, from our side, at some point to start opening those discussions. So I think having partners like your organization, for example, to talk about it and to get to do it together essentially, and to learn where the specific problems are, not the general problem, we know, but the specifics of how to simplify things and so on. I think that engagement would be very valuable when, you know, the system is kind of ready for it.
Are you familiar with Global Slovakia?
Global Slovakia, Zuzana Pavlovic?
Yes.
Yeah. So she's the lady that I was talking about earlier. That
Oh, okay.
yeah.
They are really trying to bring Slovakia
Yeah.
to the world. That's, you know, and I think they're doing a great job, but
Right.
it's just two ladies.
Yeah. So she's been quite very good at, you know, persistent in kind of raising her hand and keeping in touch. So I think that's she's a good ally there.
Yes.
Yeah.
David, you had a question?
So I'd like to talk about the brain drain from the causes of it from more of a historical perspective. You know, I've studied Slovakia, lived there. 1948, big exodus. 1968, big exodus. 1989, big exodus. And so now we come to today, and I'm going to use the word that nobody's said yet. I'm going to use the word FITSO. Okay, let's bring the elephant into the room. And so my question is, you know, looking at how the political changes over those various periods have caused an exodus. You've done surveys. I'm sure you've done surveys to create that paper. How often did it come up where people that you surveyed said, I don't like what I see with our political environment in this country, I'm thinking about leaving? Because you haven't mentioned that today, and I'm curious what the answer is.
So it's without being too political here,
Right,
but
I know.
because also Helen asked me not to be, but I
Well,
think
I'll ask you to be.
yeah. It is not just in Slovakia, but in all countries. Like when you look at models of how people are deciding which country they want to live in, the political situation and the general climate is one of the considerations for sure. It's not the top consideration typically, and I'm going to come back to Slovakia, but the top considerations are opportunities, other talent being present, and some other institutional things. But it is like a secondary consideration that people are definitely looking at. And the people that we're talking about, the kind of I don't want to say the highly educated talent, let's say, they're obviously more engaged politically, and they're more reading the news more and so on, so that it becomes a question for them, obviously. When Helen brought out the Chcem tu zostať campaign, that was about specifically linked to elections and how people were kind of proclaiming that they wanted to stay to combat the brain drain because of the political possible repercussions of the elections. So we'll see what happens. I mean, we don't know right now how strong that's going to be.
Tu zostať je iné ako zostaňam.
It is, yeah.
It's a big difference. You know, what I just said was, I want to stay is different from I will stay,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah.
And how will you draw people to Slovakia that are looking at the political situation and read the papers and see disinformation? Putin is a good person that we need to support. You know, okay, I'm sorry. You know, I think politics are important. You know, so why should we not discuss it? I realize you're on sabbatical with the government, and it's hard for you to talk about it. I used to work for your Ministry of Privatization, and they once sent me to Great Britain to discuss privatization. at the moment that Vladimir Mečiar stopped or reversed all these privatizations. So I'm up before a big audience representing the Slovak government, really, and people are asking me these questions. I could not avoid it. So, and there were people from the Slovak government in the audience as well.
Yeah.
So,
Look, I mean, it's important for people, like whether, you know, democratic norms are well respected, let's say, and not just, you know, and some people will say that they want to stay and that people should come back also because of that, because, you know, you just have to at some point fight for democracy, and it's hard to do that from abroad.
like Navalny.
So I don't know, I hope we're not quite there yet. Yeah, but it's definitely a consideration for a lot of people, and I'm not saying it's easy to do this. It's in this environment, let's say.
To give an example, one of my cousins, my first cousin once removed, he's now working in Switzerland. He lives in Spiskestad West, but he goes and works in Switzerland.
Yeah.
He told me when he was doing it the first time, it's because it's a feast show. He just comes home, come home for Easter, he comes home for Christmas. And I have heard of people in this country, the United States, who say, depending on the results of the election in November, they're going to pack up and move.
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's easy to move, I think, to, for example, the Czech Republic, right? Because the government in the Czech Republic wasn't quite like that. You know, I mean, they didn't have the greatest president recently and the greatest prime minister. But now, you know, it's both are very reasonable. So it's easy, I think, for Slovaks to kind of change that location. But the truth is also that, like, the political situation is changing in a lot of countries right now, even in the EU. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't follow all of the EU countries, but we do know that, you know, Germany had some, you know, the more right-wing parties have had some pretty substantial gains. In Holland, which is the favorite, I've mentioned it several times because it's been such a popular destination for really many students, especially after Brexit, because a lot of students, the top students would go to Oxford and Cambridge and all the UK universities, but now it's so much more expensive for them to go because of Brexit. So Holland and Denmark have taken a lot of these top students because they offered, you know, really high quality education in English. So, but in Holland they had, you know, one of the parties that gained a lot in the elections is also an anti-immigrant party with like pretty, you know, not quite, you know, endangering democracy, let's say, but pretty harsh views. And I know our niece is studying there, and, you know, their university had to kind of, after the election, had to send kind of emails to the students, kind of making sure that they're okay and they feel fine, because everyone was quite nervous about it. So you had these, it's like a wave of, you know, more extreme views, I would say, due to social media, due to different things, obviously, but it's just a more challenging world, I think, overall right now, and in Slovakia, there has its own challenges. So,
So what I heard you say, brain drain, it's mostly the educated people, that's what you're, people
it's
with
both.
degrees. And then, is there groups or sectors that are draining faster than others that you're particularly concerned about? So what are
So medical workers definitely is becoming a problem in Slovakia. So we have, I mean, that's one part. Generally, a lot of researchers, like a lot of students will go and study, already do their PhD and then they stay abroad. They don't even go there, or they leave after their PhD. So the kind of research community, I think it's great when it's internationalized and so on, and we just have to also kind of make sure that we bring more international researchers to Slovakia and make it easier for them to feel good there. And it's one of the things we're also doing in the, one of the KPIs we're giving to universities as part of the funding that through the national strategy, basically telling them you have to fight the academic inbreeding. So like you can't just have someone start their bachelor's degree and then die in the same university, like, 70 or whatever, 80 years later. And they spend their whole career in that one place. It's just bad for academics in general. So that part, and I think in general, I mean, the kind of we've mostly concentrated on the highly educated brain drain, but there's also quite a few, maybe 2/3 of the rest of the people who are leaving are not in that group, and I don't know if they're in a specific sector. We haven't really looked into that ourselves, but yeah, I mean, there's the well-known care workers, or caregivers, yeah. So that's a well-known kind of. You could also, they're close to the healthcare workers almost, but yeah. But we're, even for many of the investments that are coming into Slovakia, still in the manufacturing sector and automotive sector and so on right now, because of post-COVID and the change in global kind of supply chains, where a lot of companies are reevaluating kind of bringing the manufacturing back to Europe from China. So Slovakia has been really gaining from that, because, I mean, it's I think in anticipation also, hopefully, of at some point Ukraine becoming part of the EU and the war ending and so on. Just a lot of companies have been kind of pushing themselves to Eastern Slovakia to be ready to be close to Ukraine, basically. So there's quite a bit of investment there, but a lot of the workers actually have been coming from other countries. So we don't even, we can't necessarily supply that workforce ourselves. So the popular inflow is, for example, from Serbia, where there's, I don't know if you know, but there's first of all, there's a whole area which is like a Slovak diaspora. So it's a population that moved there. Many years ago, they still speak Slovak, but in a funny way. They have their own accent. But even Serbians who are not from that area, that's there's quite a few who are coming to Slovakia. Yeah. Yes.
Is there anything that the federal government is doing with private industry to sort of draw more companies to locate in Slovakia to maybe drive more jobs or anything like that?
Foreign companies or Slovak companies? Or?
Any company. I'm thinking more foreign companies that can maybe hire those folks, the more white-collar folks, the more skilled labor kids inside. I mean, I know other countries have like the digital nomad program as well, that are bringing other people from outside, so to give them 6 months, a year, run up.
Right. So I don't think there are, I'm pretty sure there is no kind of specific setup for a digital nomad situation, but we do have an agency called Sario, which is specifically designed to attract foreign investment and to make connections. And one of the things we did also through the National Strategy for Research and Innovation is that we gave the money for more people who can go and make those deals, essentially. but specifically for more higher value added jobs. Because sometimes, because they didn't have that many people, sometimes what happened was that they would be waiting for these companies to approach them. And what we need really is for them to be more salesy and to kind of to know exactly what we need, and then to go to specific countries and negotiate with companies that we want, that would fit to our supply chain or value chains, and to push them to be more innovative. So, so first of all, what we're doing is really like mapping those value chains in Slovakia, and figuring out like what is the ask that we're going to tell these people to search for in those other countries. And then to also have a better value proposition, because basically say, it's not like we just want you Volvo, because we also have these other companies, automakers, but we want you specific company because this is how you fit into our system and this is how you will benefit from all the other companies around you. So it's a better value proposition, I think, for that. But that's just starting. I mean, they just got the money like 2 months ago to hire people. So hopefully, I mean, it's going to be successful. Yeah.
You mentioned Sario. We had contacted them to see if we might be able to have someone come in to talk about the auto industry in general. And we're told that this summer or late summer, they're finally going to have a representative in the U.S.
That's from us. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's
So
their
they're-
representative, but we negotiated the money for them. So.
Oh, okay, good. Well,
Yeah.
it was very heartening to hear that they're going to have a physical presence of actual people here. So with any luck, maybe this fall we'll have one of their people come down and give a talk.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you mentioned the auto industry, because sometimes like people make the point of saying, well, we don't want, we want to move from producing cars to to more value-added elements of to other industries or so on. Like we don't want to make cars anymore, but that's not the point we're making, because we actually think it's quite wonderful to think about like what are the industries that are going to expand the auto industry, because we're one of the last countries in few countries in the EU where things have still been made physically. Like typically a lot of the countries have been offshoring to other, and they only had the research centers back in, I don't know, Denmark, for example, or so on. They just kept the kind of the high value added products. But when you talk to countries like Taiwan, for example, they will tell you it's actually really valuable to have both the design or the research and to have the manufacturing, for example, of chips or so on. Because you have like the constant back and forth and the exchange between how they're made. And when you move that to China, then they start manufacturing, but then they will do the research center themselves as well, and they will have that benefit basically. So it's like, how can we build on having this manufacturing experience, but also kind of expand it to other areas where we do more research, we convince the companies to kind of invest into more value-added elements as well as the manufacturing. And then it will be harder to also leave the manufacturing because there are so many connections. So that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I just realized that we've had poor Iva sitting here talking for a long time, and I'm sure that she would be happy to talk to others of us and answer other questions a little bit more informally. So I want to thank her very much for coming up from Charlottesville today on such a lovely day and giving us a presentation of this work she's been doing. So thank you very much.